Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is the show where I take a look at every classic Doctor Who story, plus a bunch of Big Finish audio dramas, one episode a day, 7 days a week. And, well, today, on the 2nd of August, 2018, we are starting Tom Baker's only televised two-part serial. Oddly enough, this is a story that came about because of, well, production necessity. The production block had two 6-part blocks, and producer Philip Hinscliffe decided, well, I only want to do one 6-parter because the 6-parters are harder to budget. The budget stretches thin, so we're only doing one. It'll help with some of the budget stuff. So what happened is that so they split up one 6-part segment into a 4-parter and a 2-parter. The 4-parter being American Space, and the 2-parter being today's story, the Sontaran experiment. And we're starting with part 1. Now, the reason I've started with all this fanfare is because, well, the Sontaran experiment isn't necessarily that good. It's really not the best of stories. Now, why am I saying this? Because, well, let's just start with the first episode. It has this issue where, well, if we're gonna be brutally honest, it's that the entire story, the Sontaran doesn't actually appear until the end of part 1, which is, not good for a story called the Sontaran experiment. It's something that, you think, wait, why? If it's a Sontaran experiment, story about, if it's, compared to, a new, comparatively, it's a story that is, it's one of those things that, that the story, that as a story, you have what is essentially, a bunch of messing around on Earth. Like, there isn't much in the way of, we're just walking around, and falling into pits and dealing with colonists who happen to have survived. Something that isn't, necessarily a bad thing for the story. It just doesn't bode well, because, well, the rest of the story had been doing so well. It would have been doing, the stories that surround it was doing so well, at giving us something new, and, well, it doesn't quite work. It's just like, hey, let's walk around, and you know what? I can't get into the characters. The characters presented here, they're not very interesting people. They don't have very interesting motivations, and they don't show themselves to be, fun characters. They're just like, yeah, we exist. We don't do much outside of existing, but we're there. It's not very good. The direction's nice. Some of the the props made are nice. It's nice to be all on location. Like, seriously, you won't believe how good it is to be how nice it looks just to be on location for once, and to have the full effect of location footage, and just being able to deal with have that as a story, but it doesn't quite feel right. Like, you don't have the full effect, and just it also doesn't help that the Sontaran doesn't appear until the very end cliffhanger, even though it's called the Sontaran experiment. And it doesn't end nice enough. So I'm going to give the Sontaran experiment part 1 a 4 out of 10. Alright, it is the 3rd of August 2018, and I just finished watching part 2 of the Sontaran experiment, the conclusion of this story. And if I'm going to be brutally honest, the Sontaran experiment part 2 would actually be pretty decent on its own, if it was its own story. But sadly, it's after part 1 where you have the problem, because, well, let's be brutally honest, part 1 was super boring, and that makes a lot of part 2 boring, because it's trying to connect parts 1 and part 2, when really, I think you could have probably made this a 1-episode story, or introduced the Sontaran a little earlier. Basically, if you wrote it as a 4-part story and then made the end of part 2 the cliffhanger of part 1, basically just tried to smush everything together, you could have had something a lot better here, because, well, the Sontaran shows up halfway through at the very end of the first episode. Now, the idea is that this is a different Sontaran, because the Sontarans are a clone race. They brought back the original actor. And let's be honest, one of the big problems, the original actor, he was slowly dying at the time. It's quite sad, but true. And also Tom Baker broke his collarbone. And there's this big fight scene at the climax. It's dull. But some of the experiments are nice, testing the strength of humans by having this thing where two humans have to hold this thing up as it increasingly gets heavier and heavier, and there's a guy tied down, and when they drop it, he will die because it will crush him because of the heat. It'll crack through the bones. So yeah, that's at least an interesting idea, if a bit completely and totally psychotic, especially because it's a Sontaran. This is actually a really good episode to show the brutality of the Sontarans, even if the story itself is quite dull. Like, there really isn't much to grasp onto. The Doctor gets a couple of good one-liners in. But again, we're doing a 2-episode story. There isn't much going into character here. There really isn't much to, complete the story, completely. It's just sort of like okay, we're doing this. It's gonna be okay. We have a story, and we're gonna do it like this. It's not really devoted to trying to make the story finish in any sort of big, amazing way of, like, this is our big story, like we have, big plans for this. No, the Sontaran gets defeated after a big fight. The Doctor tells the surviving humans, hey, the Nerva people are coming down, we're going to head back up, just stand back, and we're off. Like, it's not special. It's not at all that special. There's some really good stuff with Sarah Jane being tested for an experiment in fear, where, like, she looks like she's singing in the mud, or the rocks are falling on her. Done with some really nice camera work, especially because, again, it's great because this entire story, these 2 episodes, were filmed entirely on location. There are no sets, which sort of helps lend credibility that this is a ruined Earth, and it also makes sense as to why they're filming in a quarry, because, of course Earth would become a quarry. It's become a barren rock over thousands of years of not being touched. Something really that the story wants to go into. Like, we really could have a lot. This entire story could have been expanded to 4 parts. And it'd been interesting if we had more Sontarans, maybe. But, as the 2-part story it suffers from a shorter running time. It doesn't give itself enough time to explain itself. It's like, oh, okay, we think we're doing this, but, we really don't know. We're just, like, meandering. And the meandering is really a problem when you have what could be a great idea, a good, solid story. So I'm going to give the Sontaran Experiment Part 2 a 6 out of 10 because it's better than the first episode, and it's a good episode, it just doesn't have the best track record. And we averaged the 2 episode scores to give the Sontaran Experiment a final score of 5 out of 10. Thank you everybody for watching this rather short episode of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. Again, it's only a 2-part story, and there really isn't much story there. That's part of the problem. It's not. You can do 2-part stories that'll make me go on for a while. But please leave a like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time when we look at a story that's won multiple times for the quote-unquote best Doctor Who story with Genesis of the Daleks.